Okay, welcome back, everybody. So great to see everyone. We are excited to have just a fantastic panel to wrap up our program here in the next few moments, focused on how to protect and strengthen our democracy. We couldn't ask for a better leader of this conversation than the person who literally wrote the book on the role of state government's chief elections officer. And that it's called Secretaries of State Guardians of the Democratic Process. And now Jocelyn Benson, author of that important book, has been elected, as you all know, since 2018 as Michigan's 43rd Secretary of State. And since then, she has written the playbook for how to not only stand up to threats to our democracy, but also to promote a system that allows everyone's voice to be heard. Secretary Benson also has been the co-chair of the New Deal Forum's Democracy Working Group. We really have so appreciated her leadership in publishing dozens of recommendations, as we did earlier this year, for state and local officials around election integrity, voter access, and civic engagement. The Secretary was reelected this past November with 55, almost 56% of the vote. I think the highest total in the state of Michigan. So definitely a resounding approval of her job. And we're so grateful to have her as part of the network. So Secretary Benson, I'll invite you up to make some opening remarks and then to lead our last panel. Thank you.
Would you like our panelists to come up as well? Or?
Yeah, I think if they're all here, we'll bring them all.
All right, I'll invite our panelists up. We've got, democracy is a team sport. And if you'd like, I'll speak and then I'll introduce each of you as you come up. I think that might be easier at this point. But we've got a truly great discussion here, a truly great panel to join us to really demonstrate one of the ethoses of our office and our work, which is that democracy is a team sport. And what you've been talking about over these last few days, I think really emphasizes how everything we need to do to ensure that our state, our country, as New Deal leaders collectively is ready with us leading the way to embrace the challenges of the incoming generation and prepare our world, our country, our globe to inherit everything that we have built, from our democracy to our educational system to our roads to everything in between. And it all starts and ends with access to the ballot box. And that's what we and I, as the chief election officer of the state of Michigan, but all of us together have really focused on building, particularly at a time when the challenges to our democracy have been breathtaking, to put it candidly. It's been really extraordinary to see at the same time where we in Michigan are trying to build and expand our democratic process, and indeed helping allies across the country do the same, where we're doing that in the midst of what has been one of the most coordinated, sustained, multifaceted, multi-state, multi-year attacks on our democracy in modern times. And so we're here today to talk about how we continue to build and lead and expand and grow in the midst of a challenge against everything we stand for that requires us to be both offense, defense, if we're going to emerge from this moment with a healthier, stronger, more robust democracy than ever before, knowing that we can get there, that we can use the challenges of this moment to get there, and that at the same time, if we get there, everything you've talked about, everything that we believe in, everything that we want to see come to fruition happens. Why? Because as a result of people leading at the grassroots level and everywhere else. And I know that's what New Deal Leaders stands for. That's what we in our office and in our state have been fighting for. And the last thing I'll just emphasize is on that front, you've heard a lot about what we're doing in Michigan over these last 48 hours. You've seen it up close. We can't forget that while, yes, it is the product of some extraordinary leaders, frankly, on both sides of the aisle in many cases, but really pragmatic, bipartisan leadership and cooperation, getting things done. While that's real, all of it is made possible because Michigan has seen more voter engagement than ever before over this last decade. We have seen the highest turnout elections in our state's history, both in 2020 and in 2022. And while a lot of that success happens behind the scenes, and you're going to hear from people today, particularly Detroit City Clerk, who works tirelessly outside of the spotlight, Janice Winfrey is here to really ensure that everyone can trust that their voice will be heard and their vote will be counted, even as Detroit has sustained a really focused racially sort of driven attack on its infrastructure and election system. Nevertheless, she has led with grace and grit and with partners like Reverend Stephen Bland, who you're also going to hear from today in the faith community, because we've demonstrated in Detroit that you can have healthy, successful, secure elections where the citizens can indeed trust the results when we're all working together to support our election administration community to make it happen. And then when that happens, all of the issues that we fight for come to fruition because we elect leaders who will listen to the very people who sent them to Washington, to Lansing, to the city council, and then they act in furtherance of the will of the people. So we say all that. I'm going to introduce our panel next, but I say all that with a great note of caution. We've got a lot of reasons to be optimistic right now, and a lot of reasons to believe that all of us in this room can lead, but with the will of the people at our backs. And supporting us. But at the same time, we have to be clear-eyed about the storm we're walking into. It's been a storm that we've been in the midst of really since I came to office in 2018, probably even before then, beginning maybe even in 2016, maybe even before that. But we really saw the crux of it in 2020, when here in Detroit, people descended on what was then Cobo Hall, I think it was named. I lost track. It's now Huntington Place. But it was the place where people were counting Detroit's votes safely, securely through the night to make sure that we not only had an efficient counting of the process, but a secure counting of the process. And yet there were people, individuals, many of whom have greater power today than they did in 2020, trying to actually interfere and stop that process, fueled by lies and conspiracy theories that they continue to spread and amplify. So that was real. It happened right down the street, and it happened in Milwaukee, it happened in Philadelphia, it happened in Phoenix, it happened in Atlanta. And it's something that we have to be prepared to happen again, so that while we celebrate everything that we've accomplished when democracy works for the people, we have to realize how many folks don't want democracy to work for the people, and how it's going to take all of us working together to make sure not only that they don't succeed, but that we respond in resilience and with a democracy that ultimately thrives because of our work. So as we approach now the 2024 election cycle, knowing that in 2020, though they came for democracy, democracy prevailed. And in 2022, folks came again for democracy, and democracy prevailed. So in 2024, don't think they're not going to come for democracy, because they are. But we're going to be there too. And we're ready, and we're wizened, and we're strengthened, and we're ready with a stronger resolve than ever before to ensure that once again democracy prevails, and that we emerge from this moment with stronger will of the voters at our backs than ever before. So that said, I want to welcome our panelists up with me today. We have Reverend Dr. Stephen Bland. He's a senior pastor at Liberty Temple Baptist Church and a longtime protector of voting rights. Pastor Bland, who's the former head of the Council on Baptist Pastors in Detroit, and a leader in the faith community, not just in Michigan, but nationwide. We also have Raina Walters Morgan, the Director of Civic Engagement and Voter Protection at the Democratic National Committee, who has worked for years in the trenches and all around the country and here in Michigan to ensure that basic promise of one person, one vote in our Constitution is a reality for every citizen in our country. And we have our great Detroit City Clerk, Janice Winfrey, who has overseen the city's elections for nearly a decade, leading, as I said, with grace and with grit to ensure that we have a democracy that withstands the challenges in front of it, and that really ensures that voters have faith in the process. So all of these folks and all of us are going to talk about how we've worked together here in Michigan and how we continue to work nationwide to ensure that we're ready for 2024, but also that we are using everything that we've learned and overcome these last several years to ensure that we're ready for whatever challenges come our way. And the last thing I'll just mention as we open up our conversation is that there are many reasons for our success here in Michigan. One of it is the fact that in 2018, citizens amended our state constitution to create independent citizen-drawn districts in our state, as well as expanding voting rights to have no reason absentee voting and early voting, no reason absentee voting and same-day registration, and a lot of other policies in place. That helped us pave the way for a higher turnout than ever before in 2020 in the midst of a pandemic. And then in 2022, we saw again citizens organized to expand our democracy yet again, with this time now 9 days of early voting. So in all that to say is when citizens go to the polls in Michigan in 2024, they will be met with a plethora of options, new options, whether they want to vote early in person, absentee, from home, return their ballot at a drop box or through the mail. If they can do that, they'll have a stamp because there's prepaid postage. And of course, they also have the option to show up in person at their home precinct as well. We've got it all in our state for our voters. But one of the challenges that we are now facing is implementing that and educating voters about that. So that's one thing we'll be talking about. And the last thing I'll mention is one of our reasons for success here in Michigan, and one of the reasons I partnered with other election officials in New Deal to write the Democracy Playbook that highlights many of the approaches we implemented with great success in Michigan, really underscores that what we're doing in Michigan can be replicated, and indeed we feel must be replicated throughout the country. And what we're here today to talk about is exactly how you all can do that and take what we've been doing to expand and protect democracy in Michigan home to your states and ensure we're working together to all do the same. So I want to start with a few questions, and then we'll open it up for audience questions if there's time. So first, I'm interested, and we'll start with you, Clerk Winfrey, but I'm hoping each of you can talk about how the challenges to democracy that we've experienced over the last 5 years, really since 2020, or even before that, how has that impacted your work and your life?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
How has the challenges impacted my work and my life? Well, first let me say I am so passionate about elections and ensuring that everyone, regardless of your political affiliation, has the right to vote and do so easily. However, 2020 almost made me quit, and I've been doing this since 2006. 2020 almost made me quit when they marched in front of my home, when I went for a walk up the street while I had COVID, while my husband had COVID, while stricken with cancer, walked up the street to walk around the park, and I live in a very African-American neighborhood, right? This is an African-American city. So when I see this big 6'3" Caucasian male come up to me, flinging his arms, asking me why I cheated and why did Trump lose, I nearly lost it. I nearly lost it. And I said, this isn't worth it for me. This isn't worth it for me. But then I got angry. And I said, you're not taking democracy from us. That's all we have. You're not taking that from us. So what do? I ensure that every member of our society is engaged. All the political parties I invite to our pressers and our workshops as we think about what we're going to do next. We plan all the church pastors, all the school administrators, teachers, sororities, fraternities, everyone. During 2020, we were able to engage those individuals that worked from home, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Henry Ford Hospital. They're amazing. We engage every last soul, and we will continue to do so that people are comfortable. Because I found, and I'll stop, I found that ignorance leads to violence, right? Ignorance makes people want to assume things are not going right because you just don't know. So those people that beat on my door the loudest, those that come up to me and threaten me, those are the ones that I invite to participate in the process.
Thank you, Clerk Winfrey. Brady?
Well, to be very honest, good morning. Thank you for having me here. To be very honest, 5 years ago, I did not know what election subversion was. I've been doing voter protection work for a very long time. But what we found over the course of 2020, 2022, was that there were concerted, coordinated efforts to undermine our election processes, to threaten election officials, to try to refuse to certify election results. And so we really had to be creative about how we were going to approach this new threat. It included educating our teams on the ground to let them know that things might look a little bit different this cycle and you have to be extra diligent. But also what I will say is that people stepped up to the plate. Election officials withstood those threats. Courts were quick to dismiss attempts to refuse to certify election results. And voters decided that they wanted to choose truth and democracy over conspiracy theories and lies. And that took a lot of work from the system, the ecosystem of people. On the political side, we did a lot of work to track a lot of that subversion activity that we saw. We did a lot of training for our teams, but we also really had candidates and helped candidates understand the messaging and the framing, because at the end of the day, it was about telling voters and selling the case to them about why they needed to care about these issues, and that the issues of subversion and suppression were not going away, and that it impacted every other aspect of their life. And so making that case, I think, was really fundamental. But again, it took adjusting how we were coming to the program and creating our programs to make sure that our team's on the ground and that eventually voters really understood what's at stake.
Thank you. Pastor Bland.
Well, I just had sense enough to know that you want to fight on the same side of angry women who are passionate about getting something done. So I just didn't take much for me to be able to share, but even more so when you have some like I have come to know, and our moderator, Jocelyn Benson, and also our city clerk, Janice Winfrey, and my friend here who just spoke and shared, even though she just said that it was something about suppression she did not come to know and realize, there comes a time when things come right into your face. Central to any democracy is its right to vote. And voting is really not about partisanship, it's about citizenship. It's about empowering the voice of people. And so sometimes people wondered how come faith leaders saw the need to get involved or to share involved. Well, that's central also to faith. The fact of what we believe ought to be shared out in helping people to live out its inalienable rights. When I began to see what took place, particularly in 2016, I go back even further, and saw that our interest was not voted, that apathy and a divided conversation, even a divided media, began to push us against our own self-interest, and people decided not to turn out to vote. We lost Michigan by 1 vote per precinct. And at that moment, a shift happened nationally. And I began to see what happens when apathy rules. When we began to mobilize then to begin to see how we at least get people to the box to vote their interests, we were able to, in 2018, vote in people like Jocelyn Benson and the trilogy of our governor and our attorney general. And then we began to put bills on the table, Proposal 2, and others started happening. We started working the machine. It wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Then we began to marshal in that next vote that took place in 2020, 173 faith leaders across the state, so that we manned those boxes where people who had armed militia were showing up at the state capitol trying to strike fear. And so when people strike fear, we strike faith. And so faith showed up with collars on, a hotline, and faith in our heart, and a voter registration opportunity in our hand, in our pocket. That is what strategically started marshaling people to feel that voting is a safe act and a necessary one. Right down the street, when they began to protest it, it wasn't them who were inside counting, and I thank God for Jocelyn Benson for at least not backing down, and for our city clerk for withstanding the accusations, and Daniel Baxter as well, who's sitting here by his side, to be able to maintain that. But they also needed to be able to look for leadership to know that not only somebody was praying for them, but somebody was out there marching with them. I stood right outside the Huntington Place Now Center myself, and people were banging on the doors, trying to break in as if something was, and someone walked up to me and was angry. I said, so help me understand, sir, what are you angry about? And as they began to try to explain something that was nonsense, you talked about ignorance, put arrogance and ignorance together, you got a Molotov cocktail. And when they began to understand that what people were actually dealing with was a somewhat non-issue, but the passion was different than the actual facts, It was there that I made the statement, we've gone from picking cotton to picking presidents. And they were playing Respect, Aretha Franklin's song, on the airways, downtown Detroit, believing they were going to come steal the black vote. I said, you picked the wrong place to believe that we're not going to stand up for our democracy. It was then that we began to decide that we're going to make that. Because respect suggests that if you don't have an insult level, you don't have a dignity level. So I'm glad to talk to New Deal persons who are here of all hues and others, because it's important that we understand that right has to mobilize. Evil can never organize permanently. We must make sure we just stay in the fight, continue to be enduring, and make sure that whenever we do our part, and I think that creates a whole. So the faith perspective, I think also is Marshall, because we were allowed to have drop boxes in front of our churches. So we had the ability for having people to find a safe place where if they wanted to drop it off safely, when DeJoy and others were dealing with the mail system, they could bring it safely to the house of faith and drop it off right in front. And I could tell you stories about even how they threatened to bomb even church drop boxes, but we stood with that as well. And again, we continue to stand. We'll keep standing until we see something take place that is different. We need to have a drop box for every 15,000 voters. We need to have same day registration continue everything we did. We need to have a voting holiday on voting day, so people who have a difficulty voting can actually have the day in Michigan to vote. Whatever it is, if we can believe it and we can see it, we can achieve it. I'll stop right there.
Clerk Winfrey, what are you doing here, as we hear all that and all that we've done, what are you doing now to prepare for 2024 that perhaps others in other cities can learn from?
Ooh, what are we doing? Well, this year we don't have an election in the city of Detroit. Second time in 18 years. So what are we doing? Every staff, from the custodian to the security guard to the director of election, is participating in training, some kind of training that relates to elections and what you do for a living. That's very important. We're also thinking of ways to engage the least likely voter, those young people and their parents, right, that don't vote. So I'm excited because I don't know if you know, I'm a former teacher. And engaging children, I know when I engage the children, I also engage their parents, right? So we have where Baby Loves Democracy. I'm also a new grandmother, so when I saw this, I thought this is for the 3-year-old, the toddler through kindergarten. And it's a very good read. And during this time, many of the schools have these career days, right? And they often ask council members and myself and the mayor to read to their children. So we've given a set of these books to each council member, along with a little script, encouraging them, when you read, ask to read one of these books. This is the little older elementary school kid. This goes from like first, second grade into sixth, seventh grade. And this is Duck for President, right? This is also a good one. What we're doing, we also have this, we've always used this for many years. This is a comic book for the middle school students. And then we employ the high school students. At 16, we go out there and we recruit heavily. But what we want to do is, we don't want to just entertain these children. We want these children to understand the importance of voting, the importance of speaking what you want, right? And so during next year's election, we're going to really be in the schools with these books, and we're going to ask the students around the week before elections. I have a lot of staff. We're going to ask the students to go home. We're going to ask the teachers, ask their students to go home and ask their parents if they voted, and if they can have that I voted sticker that they got from the precinct. And if they bring that I voted sticker to school, we'll let the the teacher determine how she will reward their student. I suggest things like letting them be captain for the day and stuff like that. But whatever the teacher, because we can't pay for votes, right? We can't do that. But we certainly can encourage our least likely voters to hear from hear from their children saying, Mommy, Daddy, did you vote? Can I have the little sticker? That's one of the things we're doing that I'm really, really excited about as we prepare. But I just want to go back to 2020 one more time because I want Secretary Benson, I want her to know this. I don't think I shared this with her, but Copa Hall was ground zero for us, right? Copa Hall. It's been 3 different names. It's Huntington Center now. They were banging on the doors and blah, blah, blah. And we always have a press conference on election day. Just let people know what's going on. And Jocelyn calls me. She goes, Jens, let's do it together. I said, okay, that's okay. She said, we're going to have it at, I usually have it at my building or in front of her state building, somewhere like that. She said, we're going to Copa Hall. I said, I'm not doing that. She said, I said, excuse me. She said, we're going to Huntington Place. In the midst of, you don't know what that's like for us to show up, little bitty Jocelyn, little me. I'm scary. I don't know if
With our
her.
leather
I
jacket.
just have a big mouth. She said, no, we're going to do this together. And she stood and held my hand. I was like, this little lady here, she is really, really brave. So I thank you for that. I don't know if I shared that story with you, but I was like, yes. Face them head on, Jocelyn.
We don't yield an inch. Thank you. Thanks. That's great. And I should mention, we've also been doing some partnerships on new voters and returning citizens, and recognizing that returning citizens are also, in some cases, first-time voters, and in many cases, voters who need other things to reintegrate into society, like ID, driver's license. And so those partnerships as well have also helped. And we're going to be launching one for all of Wayne County to make sure that we're going where people are, like schools, which is, so many great ideas of reaching parents through kids, and also ensuring that everyone who otherwise wouldn't be connected to a lot of the work that we're doing to build a healthy and accessible democracy really has that connection. And then, when the darkness comes, we don't yield an inch. We just stand there. And I love the story you said about wanting to quit, because I can tell you probably everyone in this profession over the last decade or a few years has probably had those moments, I'm sure. But where we find our strength a beat later is knowing that our responsibility is not to quit and stand firm. And for me, it's knowing and this is kind of what gives me hope, is in 1965, people stood firm at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, facing down tear gas and billy clubs so that we could have a Voting Rights Act for everyone. And we owe it to them and everyone who's ever stood for democracy against those threats of violence to keep standing and marching forward. And I know that's where we develop a lot of our strength to say, not today.
And you said to me when I told you, I'm going to quit, I'm not going to do this, you said, and this made the difference for me, you said, if you quit, they win.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we are. Here we are. Beautiful. Raina, tell us what's given you hope and strength in the last few years.
Voters. Voters have given me a lot of hope and strength, despite the barrage of disinformation, despite former presidents trying to promote policies that would keep them from voting. Despite all of the challenges, voters are able to see through the lies, through the conspiracy theories, and vote for promoting and upholding our democracy. I am always just super, super thrilled, and it warms my heart when I see voters in places like Georgia who are standing in line for 5 hours, 10 hours, who, despite the fact that, people can't give them water while they're standing in line in sweltering heat, if you've ever been down to Atlanta, Georgia, they're bringing lawn chairs and their own snacks. And so the voters are stepping up. They're seeing what's happening, and that gives me hope. I'm also very hopeful about, quite frankly, the change in culture when it comes to thinking about what voter protection and voter rights programs look like. When I started doing this work, the whole notion of a voter protection program was 3 months before an election. We'll throw some lawyers on the ground, we'll throw some volunteers on the ground, and that's it. And we've really worked to try and change a culture of that. You cannot change systemic voting issues when you only put people on the ground 3 months before an election. The issues that you see happen year after year, location after location, you have to have people on the ground working on those issues during the off cycle. And the fact that people are recognizing that, and really building towards that is really, really encouraging. In 2022, Democrats, not just the DNC, but Democrats across the ecosystem ran the largest voter protection program in a midterm in history. Over 100 staff on the ground in 26 states. That did not look the same in 2018. 2018 did not have nearly the breadth and the scope of engagement and, quite frankly, commitment. Vice President Harris announced in 2021 a $25 million I Will Vote initiative to combat voter suppression and election subversion. And that 25 million went to things like staffing and technology and infrastructure, litigation. So the commitment was there, and that is also very encouraging. I am very confident and hopeful that we're going to keep that same commitment and energy moving into 2024, because as you said, the work never stops. We have to keep defending our democracy cycle after cycle.
Yeah. Thank you. And Pastor Bland, what have you found is the best way for local leaders, from pastors to other civic leaders, to get involved? I mean, you've been a real leader here in Detroit at getting others to stay engaged and get engaged, because Clerk Winfrey and her amazing team and our team at the Department of State, we can't do it alone. We need, and you've been a critical partner. How have you found a way to engage others who traditionally do election work to be involved in protecting our democracy?
First of all, I think we have to have a continued sense of awareness of what's going on. Right now, even as we are here speaking at the Council of Baptist Pastors, we have gathered people from Lieutenant Governor to several people of levels of state, people who are community leaders and others, just to come together for a time of prayer, just to talk about, and they're praying for different things, issues of gun violence in our community, things that are going on. And there's about 20 different things, 20 different leaders just coming together to start the conversation and get in one room and pray. That is not the end all, that's the beginning. That begins the process, because prayers without policy change doesn't equal anything. We must put feet to our prayers. When we get up from praying, we've got to be moving. And so we have to have that which may move to protest. It may move to whatever it may be. But it does start with us understanding we're not as divided as we are disconnected. And if we can't find a way to connect, that's a difficult thing. So awareness of our history. What motivates me and keeps me going is my understanding that the sacrifices that I make, as much as I may think they are minimal compared to my ancestors and many other persons who gave up their literal life for what they're doing. I think that's one of the reasons why people are attacking the learning of history under this whole idea of woke and everything else, where people are shutting down civic learning and everything else. People who are detached from their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes, someone said. So we have to have a sense of knowing that if you don't have scars, you never reach stars. So I have to keep my history going. I have to know my grandmothers and great-grandmothers and grandfathers and others motivate me to know to do that. I'm motivated by what I see in the present. When I see women like you, Raina, and each of you, when you have laid your lives on the line, they've come to your house, they've stood at your door. I've stood with you and prayed even as your husband was dying, but you had to still go down and represent people. These are real life issues. I can't quit when I see that there are people who are making sacrifices alongside me, and I might be the only motivation they have to stay in the fight. And so we never know how we motivate other people. And then ultimately, my grandbaby, who is 4 years old, going on 5, she's supposed to be going to kindergarten. She's ready for college. But I'm excited about the new deal, because when I look in her face, I have to ask myself the question, what kind of world do I want her to live in? What kind of impediments do I need to be moving so she has a clear path to whatever it is she wants to do in life? If it's not for me in this generation, what am I doing for her? Because somebody did it for me. I don't have to fight as hard because somebody else did, and I owe. And so I have to stay in there. I think we have to have that sense of the future. And young people are key, as you said, to this process and getting it done. I look at that. I make that, again, my mantra. And then, of course, if nothing else, I guess I would be remiss as a pastor of nearly 40 years to say my faith does not motivate me. Because every morning when I get up, I leave my prayer time saying, God, there's nothing today you and I can't face that we can't conquer together. And I hear that passage of scripture that says, be not weary in well-doing, for you shall reap if you don't give up. So I'm too legit to quit.
That's great. Wonderful. With that, I'd love to open it up to all of you for questions for our panel and about democracy or other things that you want to share that you're fighting on the ground in your respective communities that we can help or advise or inform. And please, if you have a question, just introduce yourself first and where you're from. Do you have a question?
I'm David Silver from California Volunteers, formerly from the mayor's office in Oakland. I guess in Oakland, California. I guess a question I have is in California, there's it's different than here. I'm actually from Michigan, but it's different from the Midwest and the South, and in terms of the different things that are happening. And yes, there is likely voter suppression, but it's at a different level. And my question is, what in states like California, where there is less than maybe in states like here, can we do before elections to support in areas where it is much more heightened?
I would like to say the first thing to do is don't make the mistake to think it's going to stay like that. Michigan made that mistake. We never thought that we would be facing some of the things we faced, believing that it would never happen, that we wouldn't see Alabama and Mississippi and other type events here. But our governor had to literally stand at the NAACP banquet to sign 39 bills that came out immediately afterwards to fight voter suppression. And I couldn't tell the difference between that and Selma. And the challenge for us is to never assume that where we are will stay that way. You got to fight to keep things where they are as you continue to do the work to help others. And you must reach out and get involved with others. I've gone to Atlanta several times to help to deal with organizing there. Stacey Abrams is one of the baddest women I know in the world when it comes to organizing people. And I just wanted to learn, some things and help support some things she was doing as well, because I sometimes dumb down that what we do up here doesn't motivate them here. And sure enough, while I'm there working with them, seeing how I can help, I'm hearing stories about what happens in Michigan is motivating people there. And so there is a connectedness, and we must make sure that we don't think locally, we think globally. If it can happen in one place, it can happen anywhere. So again, I would just say, be careful of making the assumption that California doesn't need it. I guarantee you it does. And I want to just say, additionally to everybody who is here, make sure you network with people from places that you don't know or people that you don't know, because those are the people you're going to need down the. So don't gather in places like this and stick with the people that you relate to. Go across ways and make it intentional to meet with people who are unlike you and don't live near you.
And I'd just like to add, make sure and ensure that you all are active with your National League of Cities, Conference of Mayors, because those kinds of national groups are so important and they're so helpful, because we're all broken down together in our own little areas, and we learn from each other. We learn from each other and we support each other that way.
I have 2 points I wanted to make there. What we are seeing nationally is that there are groups that are focused on subversion efforts, suppression efforts, that are organizing at a hyper local level. School boards, any sort of local election, they are organizing. And I think that's how it starts, right? Because it's one county board, it's one school board. But we see this trend happening in local elections and local municipalities and places all across the country. So one, make sure that you are aware of what's happening at those meetings, because those local election administrators are the ones who are responsible for ensuring that those elections are carried out equitably and fairly. There is a situation happening in Georgia as we speak, where there are efforts to organize around preventing an election denier from being the head of the election board in the most democratic county in the state. And so but also making sure that when you are in a position to make appointments to boards, and commissions, that people on those boards understand their responsibility. It's not just the elected officials, but a lot of appointed officials have the capacity to influence elections and making sure that they understand that they might get challenged by some crazy conspiracy theory that's popping up. They have to be ready to stand against that. The second piece, which is completely different from that aspect, but I think something very practical, is translation services.
Hmm.
In 2022, the DNC invested in translation services and made those services available to state parties and state organizations. We translated over 300 pieces of voter education materials, and we got feedback that for many first-time voters, having that education material information accessible in their language made the difference and helped drive up turnout. So don't underestimate just the basic services of making sure that people understand in a native language to them how to vote, where to vote, the basics. So I would definitely encourage you to think about translation and how to serve those communities of color.
That's great, and really underscores, I think, one of the things that we have seen glossed over since 2022, which is the wins of people who don't believe in democracy in many places throughout the country that are out of the spotlight. We have, and it's true in every battleground state where an election denier was on the ballot at the local, at the national, at the state level. For Secretary of State, for example, they were unsuccessful, but that wasn't the case in many other states where whoever won the Republican primary then became the state chief election officer, other positions. And so when I referenced earlier that a lot of the battles that we fought in 2020, even here in Michigan, but around the country, were against people who, and organizing that was happening outside official platforms. Now we see many local and even in some cases statewide officials who are there because they don't believe in democracy, and they ran on that, now being in a position of authority in 2024, and California and other parts of the West are no exception. And that's part of the strategy that's going to keep playing out at school boards and elsewhere that we all have to be vigilant of. So one of the things, and I think New Deal can help with this, and certainly part of the playbook was about this, is that we all need to be talking to each other across the country, right, knowing that what's happening here will happen there, as Pastor Bland said, but also when we get hit with something like, every clerk in Michigan recently got sort of duplicative and very aggressive FOIA requests for information that may jeopardize election security if provided. Were we the only state? Were there other states? We only find that out. We only find out about the national coordination and who we're really fighting by talking to each other and coordinating with other states. So all that to say is we're all in this together. And the fights that we're fighting here in Michigan, and frankly, the wins that we're having in Michigan, are not restricted to our state boundaries at all, and nor should they, and nor should we look at it like that. And hopefully more conversations like this can help us identify common strategies that we can delve in together. And the last thing I'll add to that all is that one of the things we know we're all fighting is a battle over truth versus lies, conspiracy theories versus facts. And we can, wherever we are, use our positions of influence to, whether it's about our state or somewhere else, like we do this here about Arizona and Nevada, when other states are have misinformation, we respond to that because we all have a voice that we can use to make sure the truth gets out to various audiences. And so one of the things that we're developing in Michigan that Pastor Bland and others are part of is a truth tellers task force at the state and local level to bring people, community leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, faith leaders together to help use our respective spheres of influence to proactively get the truth out there about our democracy. If we have this in every state, there's not much ground for misinformation to take hold if we're all bringing ourselves together to push forward on the truth. So there's lots of opportunities like that that we can explore to work together and build partnerships to fight back against this era of misinformation. And
Secretary Benson, might I say a word about that truth? I think that's such a great idea and a good platform to have, because one thing we have going against us now that we didn't have prior to is this social media piece where the spread of misinformation can be so rampant and get so many places. There are people who are truth seekers, but they have to find a way in a trusted place to be able to at least establish that. And it's got to be a cross-section piece. Again, it's not about partisanship, it's about citizenship of people getting reliable information. There was a time in our past that shame would change people's mindset. You could, but we've lost that. We don't have that capacity. Now it takes relationship where people have trusted people who they trust to give them good information and reliable information, and they can do what they will with it. And I think it's important that we build those relationships, because national shame and other types of things we have, unfortunately, just empowers other people. When the Board of Canvassers were challenged in 2020 and they didn't prevail, they just went after the Board of Canvassers the next time around and tried to replace them or change the laws so that they would be of different effect. So people literally are living in this day with no shame in what they might do. So the only thing that would change that, I think, is an informed public, and that truth piece. I have to keep getting used to what you call it, but whatever it is.
Truth Tellers Task Force.
Truth Tellers Task Force. I just said yes to Jocelyn Benson when she asked me what I do it, but whatever it is, I'm doing it all right.
All of this together. We have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Sorry.
Oh, we have one in the back or no? Okay, go. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. From our Deputy Secretary of State here in Michigan.
What makes you most hopeful going into 2024?
You.
That's right.
One thing that I think a lot about is just how aware we are about the challenges. And for me, knowing is half the battle, as they used to say on G.I. Joe. But, although I know that we have done a good job of reaching young voters, I also know that we have a lot more work to do. I know some young voters who would rather walk across the floor barefoot on glass than make a phone call. And so we've got to find them on social media. We've got to find them where they are. And so even just knowing that now, and honestly having the time to really think through our strategies and how we're going to find those voters where they are, is very encouraging to me. One of my colleagues said that time is a commodity that we often don't have in this space. And so having information and having time to take action on it is really encouraging for me.
For me, it's groups like this, rising up and speaking louder, groups like the civic engagement, and all the others, groups that are coming together, may have always been around, but now they're speaking with a much bigger voice and in broadening their scope. So this type of group, these kinds of conversations are encouraging for me.
Thank you. And I'll just
I
close
want to
by-
just say, when
go
I
ahead,
said
Jeff.
you, I literally meant that. Developing exceptional American leaders is a phenomenal concept and organization, and I hope you live true to your name, because without that, I think there is no hope for our future. I'm working hard to partner as much as I can to help you do what you do, and thank you for allowing me to share some time with you today in this platform. I'm literally right now working to teach from kindergarten to 8th graders what it means to understand how government works. You know, conjunction, junction, what's your function is what got me when I grew up, but they need to start that again so they understand how civics work. And I'm gonna get this book
There
too.
you go. There you
I'm
go.
gonna do it up for president. Oh, listen, see what happens when you come to do these events? You get stuff together. But I'm really counting on you, and again, I'm praying for you as well.
Thank you. And I'll just close by saying, and I've spoken now with all of you a number of years now, and when you look back to where we are, or many of us were when we started this work, for me, it was in the late 90s, investigating hate groups and hate crimes around the country, living in the Deep South, and really wanting to ensure we have a Voting Rights Act that was real for everyone. And then the 2000 election happened. And we saw for the first time how election administrators can interfere with a process to impact an entire presidential election in that Florida election in 2000. And a number of other officials as well interfering with the counting of valid votes. Now, fast forward almost 25 years. So we're, 24 years in next November will be 20 since that election. Since then, we have seen, at least just take here in Michigan, citizens take control over how they draw their district lines. Election day switch from just one day to a day where people now have a right to vote from home or early, 9 days before an election. Voter registration go from where you had to register in person to we had to register 30 days ahead of time. Now you can register online, even up to in person on the election day itself and vote right there. Our democracy has, even in the midst of challenges from 2000 all the way up till now, emerged every time stronger for it. And the reason why, as Pastor Bland pointed out, is because of people. And when we look at 2020, democracy prevailed because of people. We have citizen-drawn districts in Michigan because of people. We have better election laws than ever before and more people voting than ever before because people are showing up. And the thing that actually was both the hardest thing about 2020 for me wasn't when people showed up outside my home with armed and shelling, saying I was a murderer and other things or whatever they were coming up with. That wasn't the lowest moment for me. The lowest moment actually happened a week before that at the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, when it was the first step in an effort to overturn the presidential election. And we knew that because we'd been talking to other states and coordinating. But the plan, as we saw it, was to interfere with the certification of Detroit's elections. It was the first local community to certify their election results from 2020. To stop that from happening, and then to stop or delay our state from being certified, and to use that delay, which it would have been just a delay. We had a plan to go through the courts and ensure the election was certified, but to use that delay to both cast enough doubt on our elections and push for delays or blocking certification in other states like Pennsylvania, which was happening 2 days later, to then make a path for an alternate slate of electors to be presented to Congress and adopted by then Vice President Mike Pence. I mean, there was a plan, and it all began in that Wayne County Board of Canvassers meeting. This is why the former president was calling the Wayne County Board of Canvassers and pressuring them not to certify the election. There was a plan. And I came home that night knowing, sort of seeing it all play out and just sitting down in my in the foyer of my house and just feeling that we had lost, meaning I didn't know what we could do at that point to ensure Wayne County's certification would happen. We knew it should, we knew the law required it, but you can't control what people are gonna do at the end of the day. And then what happened that night is even though we as officials had done everything we could to see the states and local elections certify, we weren't enough to get it over the finish line. What actually happened was that hundreds of people showed up virtually and in person, peacefully, clearly, cogently, with truth on their side, with the law on their side, with the votes on their side saying, certify our election. We, the people, demand it. Count our votes. Make sure our voices count. And that's what changed the whole trajectory of everything that happened after that. Those people who showed up. So that's what gives me hope. But that's what we have to remember as leaders, but also as part of a broader community, that our power and strength lies in people all throughout this state, all throughout this country, partnerships and everything in between, saying we're going to ensure the truth prevails, that democracy prevails. Every time we do that, it prevails. So let's keep that and find hope in that in the months ahead, going into 2024, knowing that we've got the truth on our side, we've got the law on our side, we've got the majority of the American people on the side of democracy. All we need to do is harness it and ensure that we're working together to pass the finish line together. So thank you all. I'll hand it back to our media leaders. Debbie?
Wow, what a phenomenal way to end the summit. Amazing. So powerful, so inspiring. And I just want to say a special thank you to Secretary Benson. You know, she is literally an American hero, and we're so grateful for what you've done here and around the country and with our Democracy Working Group. And to her point, that group is going to continue to meet virtually so that we can keep hearing from each other about what's going on the ground and how we can stay diligent together. So we've come to my absolutely least favorite part of the event, which is to say goodbye. And it feels like we just started. But it's just been an amazing 2 days together. I'm always so inspired when we get together just to talk about, have the opportunity to kind of lift each other up and gather our resolve and be here to remind all of us and each of us why we do this every day, and to hear from all of you about the amazing things you're doing on the ground, to talk about how we can make government work better, tell our success stories, fight for government to do good things for people and to save our democracy. It's just been a really inspiring 2 days. So thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do every day. I loved what the pastor said, which is, if you quit, they win. And that's when we come together. That's how I feel every time, is just to remind each other about that. So thank you, thank you. I do have a couple of homework assignments, as I want to do. One, if you haven't done an evaluation, we would love to hear your feedback so we can make our events better. To the new dealers in the room, please, please, please tell us what you're doing so we can help lift up those success stories. We can help tell people about the wins. And remember that we were doing the Ideas Summit, Ideas Challenge again this year. So make sure that you submit an idea for that so that we can lift that up as well. My other assignment for everybody is I want you to reach out to one person you met here before we see you again in November. This community is so strong because we lift each other up all the time, and that should not only happen when we're together in person. So find somebody, call them, email them, check in on them, and then I'm going to ask you if you did that when I see you in November at our annual conference on November 15th through 17th. So travel safe. Thank you so much. We love you all.